because it's like jacked with adrenaline, your brain, it just starts going faster, and all of a sudden you can process all these things, and it's kind of this crazy like slow-mo experience, where you're just slowly falling with the water.
Lots of people like kayaking, and some even enjoy running whitewater. But then there's Raphael Ortez. He doesn't just seek out Class 5 rapids, he heads straight for what most avoid at all costs: massively steep waterfalls. The tallest one he's run is 189 feet tall. That's like paddling off the 20th floor of a building, the Leaning Tower of Pisa, or the Cinderella Castle at the Magic Kingdom.
I see a waterfall and I see a line. I see like opportunity, a new challenge, instead of just this beautiful phenomenon of nature. And it's kind of a blessing, but also a curse at the same time, because if it speaks to you, it's hard not to want to do it. Always people think I'm crazy. And I must be crazy because everybody says so.
Ortez takes his death-defying stunts to truly absurd levels, and he does it just for fun.
I watched a video when I was a kid of a guy going over a waterfall on fire, and I always wanted to try it. I feel like that's one of my weaknesses. I always look at crazy things, and in my head, I think they're gonna be easy. I'm always very optimistic like that. When it actually comes down to doing it, a project like that, I was like, we'll just hire some professionals and, put a bunch of gasoline on me and, wear the right safety and just run, go over a waterfall in my kayak on fire.
He even once traded his kayak in for a novelty inflatable toy shaped like a lobster, just for the pictures and the laughs.
I drove up to the 70-foot tall waterfall, stood over the lip, just got ready, jumped into the water, spinning 180 degrees in the air, landed, controlled myself, looked down, big fist pump at the lip.
And once, Ortez and his friends set up a whole night shoot with giant LED lights and a generator, just because he thought it would look cool.
We basically stayed in the forest through the night till 4 or 5 in the morning, freezing, and running this waterfall at night with little headlamps. We're just doing it because it was cool, making it happen.
Ortez's love of rivers started young. He was rafting around 8 years old and got a kayak for his birthday when he was 14.
So eastern Mexico, the state of Veracruz, where I learned how to kayak, just happens to be one of the best places on the planet for waterfall descending in kayaks. A few years into my paddling career, I realized that my backyard was perfect for waterfalls. So I started getting into running waterfalls, without really any instruction. I just started, watching videos online, ordering, VHS tapes and seeing how these guys were, going over these waterfalls in their kayaks. And I just started trying that in my backyard. It wasn't pretty at the start. I still remember the experience running my very first tall waterfall. It was this 40-foot drop on the Jico River in Veracruz, and it came out at the bottom. It was a big hit. I came out seeing stars. I actually broke my paddle, looked back at the waterfall, and I was like, this is crazy. And yeah, the next thing I knew, I was, going all in on this new sport that I quickly got addicted to. The first time you do it, everything happens super quick. But once you start doing this over and over again and you start really kind of feeling it, you start getting better at it, things just start happening a little bit slower.
Ortez has spent the last 2 decades pushing the limits on this sport, one that offers very little room for error. Ortez has seen his fair share of injuries, and he's watched his friends come close to death. Back in 2013, he was kayaking with his friend Jared Solis in Mexico. Solis went over before Ortez, but got swept under the falls.
I was behind him. I went over the waterfall. When I came out, I didn't see anyone. As I looked down the river a little further downstream, I saw one of my friends pulling my friend's body out of the water, and he was completely just floppy. He was pretty lifeless. He was purple, very colorless. He was not breathing. I think we must have worked on him for a full 3 minutes of these exhausting compressions, just taking turns, mouth to mouth, shouting, and it was just this crazy blur. And eventually, 3 minutes in, he goes and takes a breath. as kayakers, because we're always in these remote places, we have to learn how to rescue each other. As a kayaker that dedicates to pushing the limits and facing risk on a daily basis, you always kind of question, when are you going to finally confront death?
Surviving these drops requires a lot of experience, intuition, and a locked-in technique. Because in the end, you gotta land safely. And that means going over the lip with the right speed and the right form.
It all kind of comes down to two things. One of them is speed. More speed translates into more angle, so more of a flat landing. Less speed translated into more of a vertical entrance. And then the other thing, number two, is the stroke that you take at the lip. As you're going over, you have to be taking 1 or 2 paddle strokes to correct your angle. If it's a large waterfall, anything above 40 feet, you want to make sure that you're as vertical as possible.
Instead of just free falling over the edge, Ortez uses the speed of the water and his paddle strokes to position himself to land safely. For smaller waterfalls, he wants to land on top of the water.
Let's say if under 40 feet for a waterfall, you actually want to be coming in ideally at like a 45-degree angle. And right at the lip, I'm going to look down, lock my landing, but then I want to take a pretty long, steady stroke that kind of lifts the bow of my kayak. So that way I can, kind of lock in that 45-degree angle. If you do it right, you're able to just kind of skim the surface and then resurface pretty quickly.
But for waterfalls taller than 45 feet, he wants to go over vertically. So when he dives into the water at the bottom, he slices into it with as little impact as possible. Getting that vertical position means going over the edge with less speed so that the front of the boat falls and points down.
If it's a taller waterfall, once I'm in the current, I'm actually even like back paddling sometimes a little bit. I'm kind of way more conservative with my speed, because that, along with the stroke that I take at the lip, is going to define the angle. If it's a large waterfall, anything above 40 feet, you want to make sure that you're as vertical as possible. So as you're free falling, you're not just closing your eyes and shouting. In the end, it all comes down to the impact. So whenever you enter the water down at the bottom of the waterfall, you basically want to be as aerodynamic as possible, or aquadynamic, and you just want to kind of become as slim as you can. You want to make sure that you either throw your paddle and hug your boat tightly, or like I usually tuck my paddle to the side and then I use my right arm to protect myself and brace for impact. If you forget about this, often you end up taking a paddle in the face, and it can result in stitches, like I've probably had more than 5 times in my paddling career.
Then there's finding a good waterfall. Ortez's search has taken him around the world.
The thing about waterfall descending is that every waterfall is completely different. And in order to find that dream waterfall that you've pictured, you have to find it. We do a lot of Google Earth, satellite imaging, looking at these rivers that have the right amount of steepness. You try to find information about the volume of water. And then if everything lines up, you go explore the river, and you might get lucky and find the next huge waterfall.
And when he finds a good river, he studies it.
First, before you go into a waterfall, you want to look at it from every angle. You want to do your due diligence and study it correctly to make sure it's a good decision to start with. Every river is different. There's 1,000 different factors. Every country, every area is different. It has a different kind of rock. So you're either talking about basalt, a rock that's like fairly crumbly but creates these really nice waterfalls, or you're talking about limestone, this waterfall that's a lot more solid. The other big ingredient into the formula is steepness, because you're looking for a certain kind of gradient, but it really relates to the amount of water. So you're either talking about a river that is a small trickle of water, or you're talking about, a large river that's a big beast, that comes with a lot of other factors and a lot of risks. And before I get into my kayak, I'm looking at the current and I'm kind of visualizing myself. Step number 1, I'm scouting the waterfall, I'm studying it, and I know if it's a waterfall that I have to for sure go in vertical.
This isn't just a physical sport coupled with good gear for Ortez. He needs to trust his intuition.
A lot of it comes down to your own experience, and your own trial and error, your own understanding, even your own mindset, because a lot of it is mental. There's definitely a physical aspect to it, but a lot of it is a really big mental game, because you're dealing with a lot of stress, a lot of fear, all this adrenaline, and then just kind of finding your own zen, finding your own sweet spot, where you can kind of find that calm. And it's kind of cool, I think it's almost like a superpower. Adrenaline in the end, I believe, is, the most powerful superpower that we could have.
Ortez has been kayaking professionally for over 10 years for companies like Red Bull and Jackson Kayaks. But it's not always about the competition for him. As he's getting older, Ortez's focus is shifting a little.
I've definitely been moving, from the really tall waterfalls to other kinds of more creative projects. I've also moved a lot recently towards environmental projects. A couple years ago, I started doing river cleanups. I feel like as kayakers, we have the opportunity for being on these beautiful rivers, and often we just find garbage, and find how human beings are slowly destroying these beautiful natural environments. And the other aspect that I've also tried to help push is avoiding and taking down dams in the world, because they basically destroy the environment.
Starting a family also changed his perspective.
Now that I have a family and just had a daughter a year ago, and my life is definitely getting a little more complicated than it was even 4 years ago, because all of a sudden, from making decisions 100% for myself and deciding if I'm willing to put my life in the line, thinking about myself, now I think about my daughter first, and if anything was to happen to myself, it's more about her not having a dad. So it's definitely changed, me even just looking at danger, even just standing in front of a waterfall and looking at risk with almost different eyes.
But nothing will stop him from kayaking. Even though it seems absurd to find peace while going over a waterfall, that's exactly why Ortez loves it.
Once you get inside your kayak and you close it up, you peel out into the current, it's kind of cool because there's no way back. Fear kind of disappears, because you're so focused on the task. And then you just kind of start flowing with the river. You just kind of zone in, into this one task. There's nothing else in the world. Problems disappear. That's it, like the moment.